Hello guys, this is your friend and we are back with a new fanfic. There was a sharp mix of pungent smells permeating the air around them as Sasuke looked over Sakura's shoulder at a particular herbalist book. His friend was sitting at a table in the center of the greenhouse, flipping through the Sunagakure plant log, scratching down a list of all the ingredients she would need to create the military ration pills. When Sasuke commented on the smell, Sakura replied with, "You get used to it." And then she went into a detailed explanation of why plants even created all sorts of different smells, why many flowers had sweet aromas, but other plants had fouler scents. Sakura elaborated that it all had something to do with procreation. Something about bugs being attracted to them in order to spread pollination. She even went into the genetic purposes of tastes in plants. Sasuke listened with genuine interest at the wide variety of facts that she possessed. Sasuke turned and leaned against the table as she spoke, tucking in his chin to his chest and closing his eyes. When he was sure she was distracted, Sasuke peeked at her between the lashes of his right eye. He noticed that her brow was furrowed as she searched for the plant she had written down. After a few minutes of this, she began to tap the end of the pen against her bottom lip, a subconscious behavior many people did while thinking. Sasuke couldn't help but realize that he hadn't paid much attention to anyone's small habitual behaviors in the past few years except for in battle scenarios. To watch the cogs spinning in Sakura's mind, had Sasuke feeling like he had missed out on much in the last several years. After another few seconds, Sakura explained her concern. "I'm going to have to find a substitute plant for the medicinal aspects of the pills. Sunagakure doesn't grow Ticacia in abundance here. The amount that I would need would deplete their entire reserve." Sasuke considered her word for a few seconds before his eyes narrowed a fraction when the door of the greenhouse opened. A white-coated man with sandy-colored hair beamed hugely and raised his hand in greeting as he entered. "There you are, Sakura-san. I've been looking for you." Sakura broke from her deep concentration and turned from the table as she picked up on the calling. Sasuke raised his eyebrows slightly at the familiar tone the young man used. This must be a staff member from the hospital, a colleague that was working closely with Sakura while she was here. His presumption was confirmed when Sakura returned both the smile and call. "Sorry Mako. Hope you haven't been looking for too long." "Mako. What are they, on a first-name basis or something?" Sasuke pondered with a frown of barely knew him, or at least, that's what Sasuke thought. At least Mako had the decency to add the proper honorific to her name. Not that Sasuke could be the one to lecture on the topic. The young physician made his way over to them and immediately offered a respectful bow to the both of them. Sasuke was never very good at returning these customs of respect, but after a minute of awkward staring, the Uchiha nodded his acknowledgement in a very uncaring sort of way. After bowing, the medic immediately turned to Sakura and glanced at her work on the table. "Are you creating another medicine?" Mako asked, crossing his hands behind him in consideration, boldly reading the list she had compiled next to the herbal catalog. Seeing her co-medic's interest, Sakura picked it up and handed it to him while simultaneously pushing the book in his direction, an invitation for his opinion. "You're just the person I need right now actually." She explained to Mako how she was creating a batch of military ration pills, a notion at which the male medic's facial expression turned to one of surprise. Sasuke understood his disbelief. Not many people knew how to make such a desired sustenance that tipped the scale in favor of those who consumed it in battle. When bringing up the topic of the ingredients she needed, he raised his thumb and forefinger to his chin, pinching it in contemplation. Sasuke stiffened slightly when the young man pulled up a seat to sit beside her, pulling the book closer so they could both look at it together. "What about Ashua?" he offered, flipping to a plant towards the front of the book. Sasuke peeked over towards the illustration and noticed a shrubby little plant with bright yellow flowers. "Ashua?" Sakura questioned, frowning down at the picture. "That belongs to the nightshade family, doesn't it?" "Yes," he informed, "but it's not fatal like many of its other relatives. It's actually quite safe to consume unless the patient has some sort of allergic reaction to it. That's interesting. I'm not very familiar with it. What are its properties? It's a little stronger than Ticacia but more acclimated to our desert climate, so we have plenty of it here. Its primary effect is a boost in brain function. However, we have observed an increase in energy and muscle mass along with it. Some ninja even claim that after consuming it, it relieves them of stress. All that, Sakura pondered, dropping her jaw. Sasuke raised an inquisitive brow as well. With benefits like that, it was a wonder they didn't add it to every meal here. There had to be missing information obviously. Sakura must have been thinking the same thing Sasuke had, because she immediately responded with, "What are the negative effects?" Mako smiled at her insight. "Just like Ticacia, you crash and suffer chakra depletion as a result. You have to take far less of it than Ticacia. Like I said earlier, many people have severe allergic reactions to the plant, which is why we don't use it often." Sasuke couldn't help but frown at the pair of doctors who discussed plants so casually with one another. Mako had a sort of charisma about him, and Sasuke could tell why Sakura would rely on him while she was here. The young man's temperament sort of reminded Sasuke of their old schoolteacher, Iruka-sensei. However, Mako's knowledge was so thorough that he almost reminded Sasuke of Kabuto. Sasuke had witnessed many in-depth medical conversations between Orochimaru and him. Still leaning against the table, Sasuke closed his eyes, adopting an uninterested guise to go with the frown. Seeing them together, discussing their common interests, reminded Sasuke of something despite his epiphany last night. Watching her familiarity with this person reminded Sasuke that just because he had finally admitted to himself that loved her, didn't mean that he should do anything about it. Sakura had told him firmly that she would only ever choose him and to not assume that if he left her alone, she would fall in love with someone else. Sasuke truly believed his female teammate about this. But seeing her cheerfully interact with Mako made Sasuke want to believe otherwise. Even though it stung him to think about Sakura loving someone else and another man being a part of her daily life, waking up beside her and hearing a confession from her lips, Sasuke knew it was what she deserved. He could never be that sort of man for her, especially not in the near future. But now that Sasuke was certain of his feelings, would he be able to only ever be a close friend to her? Would he be able to watch someone else come into her life and become the person Sakura swooned over and built a family with? He would, Sasuke told himself. He had to. Sasuke had already chosen in his heart to be the Itachi of this time and make the sacrifice for the greater good so that his loved ones like Sakura even had a future. He had to keep reminding himself of this. Without meaning to, he let a low exhale of self-defeat escape his mouth. Realizing he had done so, Sasuke quickly glanced to his right to make sure no one noticed. Sakura, who Sasuke now noticed had stopped what she was doing, was now watching him despite the fact that Mako was still flipping through the book and explaining something to her. His Kunoichi teammate locked gazes with him, furrowed her eyebrows, and tilted her head in silent question. Sasuke broke their eye contact immediately and Sakura returned her attention to Mako. It's for the best, he thought to her. Mako led Sakura across the greenhouse to the white-labeled bushel of ashu that he had spoken to her about. She measured out the amount she would need and began cutting it carefully with his assistance. Sakura had been surprised at this substitute that Mako had offered with certainty at its effectiveness. She pinched a sizable piece of it and placed it on her tongue and began to chew. With it being a nightshade after all, she wanted to be certain that it wasn't toxic. Nightshades were highly cultivated by humans and most were safe to consume like Mako said, but since she had never heard of this plant and it was unfamiliar to her, she wanted to double-check Mako's claim. Besides, he said it could cause allergic reactions. Just so Mako's feelings wouldn't be hurt by her taste testing, Sakura simply announced, "This actually tastes quite yummy." Much better than the bitter Tikasuya. Then she called out loud enough for Sasuke, who had been casually leaning against the table since their arrival, to hear, "You're in luck, Sasuke. Maybe these pills won't taste like mudballs, this time like Sai famously calls them." Sasuke peeked open his right eye at her, clearly not grasping a word of what she was referencing. Mako, on the other hand, laughed at her statement. "Tikasuya is rather bitter. Is Sai a friend back home? Your friend really called them mudballs to your face." Mako laughed. Sakura chuckled to herself a bit, returning her full attention to Mako. "Sai is a sort of special friend. He's brutally honest. Always has been. Sometimes we need friends like that," Mako said reassuringly, helping her pluck the stems and flowers of the plant and wrapping it up in paper. Sakura nodded in agreement and instantly recalled many of her friends back home, and a sort of homesickness radiated in her chest at the thought of them. She wondered how all of them were doing. She also thought of the hospital and Lady Tsunade in that moment too, and made a mental note to write a letter to check in on them. She glanced up at Sasuke for the 20th time that day, and her homesickness disappeared. When he was absent, she was always sick with longing for him. It suddenly surprised Sakura that she had never felt more at home than when she was with this man. She had confessed this to him before, but when he was gone, it felt as if she was alone. Sakura would fall asleep with thoughts of him and miss him just as much the following morning. That feeling had disappeared on her journey, and this was the first time the kunoichi had missed someone else since she had picked up her bag and followed Sasuke down the cobbled street that night a few weeks ago. Mako's statement returned her to the present moment from her thoughts. "Isao slept well last night. After you left with Gaara, he was distraught and restless after what happened. We ended up giving him your dosage of the sleeping medicine and he didn't experience any sleep terrors." "That's terrific," she exclaimed, almost jumping for joy in her excitement. This was exciting news. If they could eliminate the terrors, then Isao would be okay. Maybe he could stop taking the medicine once his body adjusted. Sato, his father, however, Mako began as they made their way back towards the center table towards Sasuke. "Well, he's a bit hysterical in the hospital. The man definitely needs to be there, but we are not quite sure what to do for him. He's actually the reason I came looking for you. I figure you might be the only one able to talk to him." Sakura nodded as they came to a stop and she set her items down. "I see. Sasuke had been thoroughly pissed when Sakura had announced to him her plans and handed him the bundle of paper-wrapped yellow flowers. "Will you grind these up for me while I quickly check in on a patient? They should be dry enough on their own. We need to mix this in with the rest of our batch as soon as possible." The Uchiha nodded with a but had half a mind to shove the flowers and grinder toward Mako since he was inclined to be so damn helpful. Apparently, she was duty-bound to go see some hospital patient with an attitude problem, and Sasuke had guessed easily who it was. After seeing the bruises on her chest last night, it was hard not to think about this patient of hers. It settled like a knife between Sasuke's shoulder blades as he began to pulverize the flowers in the mortar with the stone pestle. He glowered after the two medics as the door to the greenhouse swung to a shut behind them. Sasuke knew that Sakura was aware of his eagerness to get the pills so he could return to his mission. And because she predicted this, Sasuke knew without a doubt that Sakura had played him. She had given him this little job to keep him occupied for a few minutes because he couldn't put the task off. But what she didn't know was that it certainly wouldn't take him as long as she hoped. Sasuke removed another heap of flowers from the paper and began to smash them forcefully. Sakura had managed to come up with a small plan in the few seconds after Mako had informed her about Sato, Isao's hysterical father, whom Sakura and Gaara had placed under the care of the hospital yesterday. The first and most necessary part of her plan was to keep Sasuke busy and away from her patient. After seeing her teammates' reaction to the small bruises on her chest last night, she didn't want the two ninja to have the least bit of interaction. The second part was to ensure that Isao was kept far, far away from his father. If the child was showing any progress at all after having distance from him, then Sakura would be damned if Sato meant to screw that up. Trailing closely behind her, Mako confirmed her hope that Isao remained at the mental health children's clinic and was being strictly supervised. Finally, the last rocky bit of her plan was to try her best to remain calm and civil with Sato despite what she predicted his treatment of her would be. Sakura anticipated every bit of an angry temper and possibly aggression. Having Mako with her made Sakura feel more reassured. In the back of Sakura's mind, she knew she didn't have anything to worry about because she could rely on her abilities as a ninja, not his, but it was still a comfort to have him with her as a steady, supportive presence. When they finally reached Sato's hospital room and they entered, Sakura gasped. Apparently, Sato had considered this place a prison cell rather than a patient room. The bed was tipped, and the curtain torn from the rod above the windows. The massive punched-out crevices in the walls around them were threatening portraits of warning. Sakura heard Mako echo her surprise. Sensing their presence, Sato turned from the window and glowered at them. "Glad to see my warden has finally come to see me," the man spat viciously. While Mako's expression was one of disbelief, Sakura erased the emotion from her own, slipping on a blank pretense. Forget step 3 of her plan, then. It was obvious what kind of man Sato was. He had no respect or care in the world for anyone, and her kindness would be seen as a weakness to bully her for. Pretending to be civil would be an entire waste of her time because Sakura recognized the hate in Sato's eyes, glassy pools that reflected the darkness in his heart. How bitter it made Sakura to see Sasuke's formal self in one of her patients. How hopeless this conversation would be even though he was the one person who needed it the most. Sakura believed this man deserved her gentlest persona, but Sakura had tried playing this game before and failed miserably with Sasuke. If Sakura, a former teammate and close friend, couldn't have reached into the depth of Sasuke's darkness and ripped him from it, then how could she expect to be successful with an absolute stranger? She thought of Naruto and Gaara and how they might approach this. Adopting Naruto's methods before, Sakura had fought Sasuke to knock some sense into him, but Sakura couldn't just start fights with her patients. Confidence then. Sakura crossed her arms behind her back and raised her chin. "I'm not your warden, just someone who is trying to help you and your son." He began to laugh, that psychotic pitch that set Sakura's heart racing. It frightened her to see that this man was more lost than she had thought. This wasn't just a man who had taken his anger out on his son. "That's what pisses me off the most about you Leaf Village filth. You think you have the right to march in and do as you please." Mako responded before Sakura could silence him, "Be careful what you say. Haruno-san is an honored guest of the Lord Kazekage and he asked for her assistance at the hospital." "Well, half true. I did invite myself here, I suppose." Sakura didn't correct Mako. Sato was completely prejudiced toward Konoha and its citizens. She reminded herself to steer clear of the political past between their two villages. Sato's next comment brought an immediate halt to Sakura's analytical approach to reasoning with him. You'd think the Kazekage wouldn't give his horrors a false sense of entitlement in a village they don't belong in. It was hard to contain her inner voice at that moment, who happened to be screaming loudly. "Who the hell does this bastard think he is?" Sakura let out a calming breath and put hand on Mako's arm, who was surprisingly doing a good enough job for the both of them at giving this terrifying ninja a piece of his mind despite the aptitude gap. Before she could respond, the door opened and someone stepped in. Seeing Sasuke momentarily took her aback because that powder job should have taken him at least 45 minutes to complete, yet here he was a mere 10 minutes after being assigned the task. He must have a question. And then Sakura saw his face. A red and purple combination flashed towards Sato and Sakura's stomach dropped to her feet. Had he just heard what Sato called her? When Sakura reached him and placed a hand on his arm, his gaze snapped from Sato and landed on her. Did you need something? She asked kindly, assessing the situation and deciding to act casually. Maybe if she came off as unaffected by Sato's comment, then Sasuke wouldn't feel the need to react. Here, he responded gruffly after recovering some composure, shoving the mortar she had given him earlier towards the space between them. You said you needed this quickly, didn't you? Go on ahead and make the batch. I'll talk to this guy. Sakura briefly savored the startled look on Sato's face before turning her body towards Sasuke so she could whisper in private with her teammate. Sasuke, I don't think that's. It's fine. He softened his murmur to match her whisper. As he said this, his Sharingan faded and his emotionless mask slipped back on. Just a talk between ninjas. I think it's a great idea, came Mako's eager voice behind her. I'll stay too. You go on ahead and make that batch before time runs out. Sakura snapped her head towards him, shaking her head with large eyes in silent begging, but Sasuke was the one who spoke. I didn't ask you to stay. You can leave too. He stays, Sakura volunteered, to which Sasuke glowered at her. A doctor must be present during an exam, after all. This was most definitely not professional, but Sakura had used a time excuse to keep Sasuke busy earlier. Mako knew as well as she did that it didn't matter what time the Ashua was added to the mixture, and he was using her lie against her. She didn't know her friend of a medic could be manipulative like that. Mako knew she didn't want to tell Sasuke that she had fibbed about it. Grabbing the mortar, Sakura peered up into the Uchiha's eyes, reconsidering her fear of the two ninja meeting. If Naruto or Gaara weren't here, maybe Sasuke was the next best person to talk to him. Now that he had come back to the light, perhaps Sasuke could reach Sato in a way that Sakura wouldn't be able to. Sometimes people who had experienced trauma would only listen to someone who had shared a similar pain. And it had been proven to her throughout the years that sometimes only monsters could understand monsters. Sasuke waited until Sakura's footsteps receded far enough down the hall before his eyes locked onto Sato for the second time. Uchiha Sasuke, isn't it? Sato inquired, daring to speak first. I never would have guessed I'd ever see your face again after the war. Good. You know me, Sasuke announced, fully entering the space and leaning against the rightmost wall, just 15 feet away from Sato in this small room. Then you're aware of the terrible things that I have done to better men than you. To be honest, Sasuke hated to play the reputation card. In fact, he wanted to get as far from his past as possible, but he needed this bastard to know just exactly what he could still do to someone that pushed him far enough. He noticed Mako shift excitedly at the left of the entrance. Apparently Mako was hoping for a show. Good, Sasuke thought, he needed to hear this too if the male physician had future plans to stay next to his friend. Sasuke got straight to it. The truth is that you're not going to listen to anyone, so this is going to be a waste of time and breath. Sasuke knew because he had been in this exact same frame of mind before. So why bother staying? The man spat, rage leaking from his mouth like saliva from a rabid beast. Sasuke was correct in his analogy. Like Sasuke himself had once been, Sato was nothing more than a creature that there was no hope left for, and it needed to be taken out of this world. That's what Gaara had practically told Naruto to do, take Sasuke out and do the right thing as his friend. It's what Sakura had tried to do and failed. But Naruto had done the impossible. With memories of his friend in his heart, Sasuke sighed and willed himself to put at least a little bit of effort into this for his friend's benefit. For the sake of the woman you just called a whore. I care more about her and her goal than the few minutes I could be doing something more beneficial than talking to you. Of course, he would never tell her that. Sasuke felt like there was no point in beating around the bush. His voice would give out if he continued talking at this rate. He reminded himself that he didn't owe any explanation, any psychological nonsense, just the cold truth that Sato needed to hear. Despite how hard he might try, Sasuke wouldn't be able to pull this off like Naruto. Naruto would have marched up to him like a bull, grabbed his collar, proceeded to threaten him for saying such a thing to Sakura, and then somehow miraculously convinced this man to change. Sasuke, on the other hand, was less predictable. Depending on which part of his life you looked at, Sasuke could have had several reactions to Sato's comment. Sasuke before Orochimaru would have been angry but level-headed, at most offering the man an analytical glare. Sasuke immediately post-Kursamark would have gutted him in the same mania he had broken that sounded like ninja's arms in the Forest of Death. Vengeance-bent Sasuke would have completely not cared at all. But the Sasuke he was now. Even though he was on his path of redemption now, something in him had become honed again, sharpened along with the internal acknowledgement that he had feelings for Sakura. Despite his accepting of the truth, Sasuke hadn't anticipated feeling this defensive, and this is what scared Sasuke the most about himself, his unpredictability. When Sasuke had tried to sever his bonds, it was to eliminate the feelings that came with them. He had seen it as a weakness. If his attachments were few, then Sasuke could remain loyal to a way of life he hoped for, one of peace. But having Sakura near again and feeling responsible for her had Sasuke fearing for the worst about his character. He had relayed this concern to Naruto before he left the village several weeks ago. What will keep me from the darkness? From choosing the path of revenge? I will, Naruto had responded. I'll stop you. If men like this were regular in Sakura's life, how could Naruto guarantee that Sasuke wouldn't snap one day and kill every single person who threatened to do her harm? What if one of them succeeded? Could Naruto prevent everything? Stop, Sasuke told himself. Stop thinking like that. Sato didn't laugh again for the entire conversation. He remained standing by the window, narrowing his eyes at Sasuke in wary consideration since the Uchiha had arrived, not necessarily scared, but an enemy weighing his odds and deciding to avoid major triggers. Smart, Sasuke thought. Not completely brain dead then. As Sasuke was consumed in silent thought, Mako stepped in for him. It was the first time all day Sasuke liked the medic. We know that your wife died. Is that the reason you are abusing your son? Unlike with Sasuke, Sato revealed his temper, like a bomb going off without warning. What I do with my son is nobody's damn business but my own. Unaffected by the sudden rise in volume, Sasuke surveyed the damaged room around them. Sato sure made it look like he was being held against his will, but the truth was, Sasuke realized that if Sato had truly wanted to leave, he would have. There was nobody physically stopping him from leaving. The only thing really holding him here was Gaara's command. Ah, so that was it. Badmouthing the Kazekage all he wanted, Sato still respected one thing, and that was power. Sasuke tested the theory with, the Kazekage believes it is his business. Everything is apparently his damn business, Sato growled in his direction. Sasuke immediately noted that this was not a shouted response like he did when Mako spoke. Sasuke deduced that Sato held enough respect for the people he feared. That included himself. Damn, how annoying. Sasuke was going to have to do all the talking after all. To be honest, Sasuke had just wanted to remove Sakura from the situation and came up with the talking part to get Sakura to leave. Now, he supposed he would have to deliver. Mako tried reasoning with him again. Does the child remind you of your wife? Is that the reason you mistreat him? Sato's eyes grew wide at Mako's question. How dare you? Forget it. Talking like this was getting them nowhere. Sasuke's visual prowess was nowhere near restored, but what Sasuke planned to do wouldn't take up much chakra anyway. This wasn't his typical style, but trying to talk with this man sure as hell wasn't his style either. Sasuke revealed the black tones of his right Sharingan, instantly immobilizing the man where he stood. What are you doing? Mako asked with concern, walking up beside him. You're not going to use a genjutsu. Just shut up and stay out of it, Sasuke announced in annoyance. I am getting the answers. Sato's mind was a black, fiery wasteland that Sasuke stepped out on. The ninja's memories appeared before him like colorless corpses rising from the grave. Sasuke walked forward toward the past, surveying memories in order from most recent to oldest. The first memory that shaped the air before him had Sasuke considering deactivating the jutsu. Whether he had subconsciously looked for this memory or not, Sasuke didn't know, but he watched it play out before him. His pink-haired teammate was standing her ground, glaring up into the face of the man whose memories Sasuke violated. Sasuke frowned in hatred at the image of his fingers jabbing into her chest. Sato was looking down at her with a ferocity that he had yet to display towards anyone else. Why? On cue, another memory emerged, connected to this one and providing Sasuke with the answer he wanted. It was during the war and Sato was immobilized on a cot, bandaged and regaining consciousness. Pink hair came into the ninja's vision as he tried to roll to the side. Miss, he called toward the female ninja. Where am I? Stay still, Sakura ordered him, pushing him back down on the cot. Your leg is severely injured and needs to remain immobile. She began giving orders to her assistants when a boom suddenly sounded somewhere nearby. Sato watched as she got to her feet and headed in that direction as someone began screaming her name. My wife, he croaked, trying again to rise. This time, no one stopped him as he began to fumble towards the line of patients, some unconscious, others screaming. Rina, he sobbed, searching the faces of the incapacitated. Where are you? He finally found her in the back row and he began limping faster toward her. Rina, he screamed, falling to his knees beside the woman who was bloody almost beyond recognition. Sasuke looked away from the memory as Sato began searching with hands for the wound on her body. Somehow the woman had reopened her injury and was now bleeding through the bandaging. When Sato found it, he began to moan. Sato clutched onto his broken wife and lifted her despite his leg. He was barely able to support her as he began limping back toward the medical professionals. Haruno. He tried to shout after the woman who had disappeared in the rising clouds of debris and dust. Haruno. When a medic finally arrived to assist him, it wasn't the one Sato had hoped for. Please, he begged them. She's dying, bleeding out. Sasuke saw the man's world shatter on his face when the medic began to shake his head after checking the woman's pulse. I am sorry, sir. She's already gone. No. He began to scream, picking up his wife again and limping after the woman he believed could still save her. The memory ended after Sato disappeared into the rubble screaming after someone he clearly never found. So that was it, Sasuke realized, stepping toward a new memory that materialized in the swirling darkness. He blamed Sakura for his wife's death. The next memory Sasuke played was Sato returning from the war and staring into the face of the child he and his wife had left behind. Sasuke was shocked at the resemblance the child held to Rina. Sasuke witnessed Sato experience the blow of pain that came at seeing the same likeness. When the child reached for him with tears in his eyes, Sato turned away from him, covering his anguished face and stepping past the threshold. Isao's current caretaker reached for him to relieve his father's neglect. Sasuke felt like he had ashes in his mouth. He was more familiar with grief than anyone, but grief affected people in different ways. Sasuke both understood and didn't understand. He didn't dare go further. Sasuke knew what happened next concerning the child and didn't want to see it for himself. Deactivating his Sharingan, Sasuke withdrew from the black backdrop of Sato's mind. What did you just do? Sato asked, sinking to the floor on his knees and holding his head, an aftereffect that had Mako looking between the two ninja in fearful concern. Sasuke saw no point in explaining to either of them. Sato was more than aware of what just happened. I could erase a couple of those memories, Sasuke explained to the whimpering man on the floor who gazed up at him in anger. Is that what you want? Sato hesitated before saying, You could really do that. Is that what you really want? Sasuke asked bitterly, for someone to reach into your mind and take away all memory of your wife or child. To dishonor both of them. No, Sato declared. Not if it will remove them from my memory. The pain, just take that away. Pain is a part of life and not something I can tamper with, Sasuke deadpanned. If you let it, your pain will turn into darkness, consume you, and taint every aspect of your life. Your son is the only thing you have left of your wife. You should value that and cling to that as your light. Sasuke understood what Sakura meant earlier when she told Sasuke her conversation with Gaara about the past generation affecting the next with their toxicity. Sato didn't respond and Sasuke didn't say anything else. He had said what he needed to, although it left the Uchiha feeling like a hypocrite. Turning to Mako, Sasuke declared, send the son to the Leaf's mental health clinic, get him as far away as you can. The child needs to be in a different environment, or he will turn out like father. It'll give Sato some time to reconsider what's important to him. Opening the door, Sasuke thought twice before exiting. Also, he remarked to the man who began to sob on the ground. The next time you lay your hands on my friend, you'll have me to deal with, not the cage. Sato began to scream in anger, throwing things against the walls again. The door swung shut behind Sasuke and Mako, closing the prisoner in his self-made cell. Sakura had fully intended on eavesdropping on Sasuke's conversation with Sato. In fact, it was the only reason that Sakura had allowed the interaction to transpire between her patient and her teammate. After Sasuke had closed the door firmly behind her, Sakura had walked heavily down the hallway so her footsteps could be heard. Her next step was to take the stairs, walk silently up 2 floors, and listen in by opening the window directly above Sato's. Sakura had noted that Sato's patient room window had been cracked open. Surely her ninja skills would be well adapted to a simple eavesdropping. But that's not what happened. Instead, as Sakura walked down the hall, she noted that her breathing was becoming short. Her chest was tightening considerably, a feeling that she dismissed at first to anxiety at the current situation. When she paused to consider it, Sakura tried to swallow past her itchy throat. A terrifying realization came over Sakura as she glanced down at her hands that held the freshly pulverized Ashua. Shit. Sakura covered the mortar, sprinted down the remainder of the hallway, and took a right. She held tightly to the Ashua despite the situation. She couldn't afford to sacrifice what they had acquired in her state of panic. Sakura tried her best to remember the hospital's layout. There was a drug storage room on every level, so thankfully Sakura wouldn't have to take stairs in her compromised situation. Turning another corner, Sakura was relieved to finally stumble up to the door marked, Yao, for medication. Placing the mortar of Ashua on the ground, Sakura managed to focus through her shortness of breath and perform the sign of the ram to channel her chakra to her palm. Placing it on the center of the door, Sakura nearly stumbled as the door received her chakra signature and swung open to grant her access to the room. Sakura's vision began to blur as she shuffled through the drawers and cabinets. She could barely read the itemized labels of the stored items. Don't panic. Don't panic. She felt lethargic and her throat was swelling quickly. She should have taken Mako's warning more seriously. He had told her of the drug's disuse in the medical environment due to many allergic reactions to it. This was what she had been testing earlier when she picked a generous pinch of Ashu from the ground and placing it in her mouth. However, her and Mako both had gotten distracted by the issue of Sato. Sakura cursed at herself for being careless but felt confident in her approach. If only she could find the medicine. She narrowed her focus to the vials on the top shelf and coughed violently as she reached for one. Stumbling into the shelf resulted in several of them busting onto the ground. After locating the blue-tagged bottle labeled, Adrenaline, Sakura threw open cabinet after cabinet until she found the drawer of packaged syringes. She was choking now, a fish out of water, and she aimed the needle into the top of the bottle, Her hands shook as she wasted even more time trying to draw the medicine into the plunger. Sasuke was trying to outwalk Mako, who was smiling kindly and attempting to make small talk as they quickly made their way down the hall from Sato's room. Sasuke thought if he could just stride quickly enough, Mako might take the hint and part ways with him. Sasuke frowned at Mako's prattling of, "I have to admit. I was concerned with the whole genjutsu approach, but I think that it might be pretty effective." That was brilliant. Sasuke stopped his breakneck pace and narrowed his eyes at the medic, scrutinizing him carefully. "What do you want? What do you mean?" asked Mako innocently, crossing his arms behind him. Sasuke debated Mako for a second. Here was a skilled shinobi of medicine, an assistant to his friend, and Sakura addressed him casually. This trip was the first occasion that Sasuke had ever met him, yet Mako recognized Sasuke's attempt at genjutsu before he had even performed it. Perhaps he was knowledgeable of the Sharingan, many people were. It was Sasuke's past of constantly being targeted that had the Uchiha wary. Was this the reason Sasuke was inclined to distrust him, or was it the fact that Sakura was involved? Sasuke clarified. "I want to know who you are and what you want." Mako laughed and smiled nicely. "Well, I am a medic ninja here at the Suna Hospital. I have been appointed to assist Sakura-san during her stay with us." Kankuro was pretty adamant about it. Sasuke responded before walking forward again. Mako sped to catch up. "Honestly," he continued, "Sunagaku owes a lot to Sakura-san. You have probably heard this before, but we have advanced due to her and the Leaf's medical supervision and instruction. We are something in her debt." Sasuke didn't respond. Perhaps that was all there was to it. Sasuke supposed it made sense that Gaara and Kankuro would assign the most ambitious learner and fellow medicinal expert as Sakura's assistant. Sunagaku wanted to take advantage of every lesson and tip available. Sakura's discipline and dedication to the medical practice made her share a common interest with the professionals here. Not everyone always had some double meaning to their actions like most ninja in the shinobi world. As Sasuke and Mako rounded the corner to the left, they paused as several people ran past them in the opposite direction, back toward the center of the third floor. One man who bumped into Mako's shoulder turned to look at him in recognition, jogging backwards. Code 10. Haruno-san. Shit. Mako cursed, chasing after the man who spoke. Sasuke didn't know what Code 10 inches meant, but to see a panicked response in connection to the name, Haruno, had Sasuke quickly following. "What is it?" he demanded, matching Mako's stride this time. "Anaphylaxis," Mako said breathlessly as they rounded the final corner and nearly collided with several attendants outside a small room in the hallway. Someone was kneeling just outside the door and Sasuke couldn't make out the questions they were asking before until he began to make his way through with Mako right on his heels. When he came in line at the entrance, Sasuke froze. Sakura was on her back, broken glass surrounding her on a messy floor. A medic was kneeling down beside her and removing a syringe from her hand. "We need to get her into one of the rooms. Now." Sasuke's heart was racing as someone wheeled a gurney past him. Mako began pulling him away from the entrance, to which Sasuke almost shrugged off. Sakura's pink head was closest to the door, so Sasuke couldn't get a good look at her face until they began lifting her onto the gurney and wheeled her past him. To Sasuke's great relief, his medic friend was fully alert despite the hives across her face and swelling lips. When making eye contact with him, she raised her hand and waved awkwardly. "Hey," she said past swollen lips. "Hey," Sasuke responded, irritation quickly replacing his concern. Was she serious? Mako let out a surprised laugh at her casual greeting. Sasuke ignored him completely and began tailing the gurney as it rolled away with her. "What the hell happened?" he asked her with pointed annoyance. After failing to mumble past her tomato mouth, Sasuke shook his head. "Never mind. I'll explain," Mako said from the other side of the swiveling table. Sasuke spent the next several minutes listening to Mako explain a basic understanding of anaphylaxis and staring disbelievingly at Sakura as they unloaded her onto a bed. They began to hook her up to an IV and other machinery that would monitor her pulse and blood pressure. Mako continued his explanation, antihistamines are what comes next. Luckily, she responded to the epinephrine and doesn't need intubation. We'll have to monitor her for a few hours just to make sure she doesn't have another episode. Sakura was nodding her blistered head in agreement at everything he said. Sasuke just glared at her. Why did you eat a plant you knew was toxic? He asked crossly. She shrugged her shoulders, the only response she could really make at the moment. I should have stopped you, Haruno-san. Mako bowed. It is all my fault. Sakura began shaking her head to dismiss Mako's apology. Then she began to gesture for Sasuke to come over to her bedside. When he was close enough, Sakura pointed toward his hand. What? He asked, looking down at it. My hand. What about it? He sure wasn't going to hold her hand if that was what she was implying. Especially not in front of anyone. A word made it past her lips but Sasuke didn't understand it. HN. Wrath, she repeated, still pointing. Daya hath a wrath. Oh, Mako exclaimed. You were handling the Ashua earlier, Sasuke. Do you have a rash on your hand? Ah. Sasuke's hand was partially gloved except for his fingertips, which were unmarred. It had been approximately 30 to 45 minutes since Sasuke had even touched the plant. Sakura had sampled the herb 10 minutes before that, so it was too early to tell if Sasuke would have a similar reaction. He didn't have a rash on his fingertips though. Another physician handed Mako a familiar mortar and removed his disposable gloves after touching it. Mako immediately pinched a piece out of it and offered it to the Uchiha. Sasuke responded with a glare as Mako continued to hold it out. You're not suggesting I eat that. We need to make sure that you don't develop a similar reaction, especially if you plan on using the chakra pills that Sakura is making. Sakura was mutely nodding in agreement and Sasuke annoyingly spat out toward her. Why? You want me to end up looking like you? Her nodding turned to shaking. She followed with, he's aight. Eat while you are here. Sasuke scoffed and blinked in disbelief at her communication efforts. How was she even talking? This was an absolute lunatic idea. She wanted the both of them in hospital beds in this village while Gaara was away handling potential psychos that were after them. It was already a concern that she was incapacitated. Sasuke sure as hell wasn't going into anaphylaxis too by choice. I'll wait until you're better, he answered, shooing Mako's hand away from his face. As he did so, Sasuke pointed at the door, ordering Mako to just go and check on Sato's kid. Mako blinked at him in confusion before taking the hint and exiting with that same excuse. When the silence grew thick between them, Sasuke took a casual stance against the wall next to Sakura's bedside. You're watching time, Sakura began, looking guilty despite her swollen mouth as she tucked her hands beneath the covers and looked around at non-existent people in the room, anywhere but at him. She was right. He was wasting time, and Sasuke mentally shook himself as he realized his indifference to that. He was trying to remind himself of his goal, but in that moment, Sasuke's feelings were outweighing that purpose. He turned his back and peered out the small window at the darkening sky. He glanced back at her briefly before turning back to the window. Are you okay? There wasn't a reply, which had the Uchiha worried, and he turned to see her wide-eyed expression at his question. The face Sakura was making looked as if Sasuke had grown two heads. I mean, he added quickly, with a mouth like that, it looks difficult to breathe. She immediately covered her mouth and frowned at him, obviously embarrassed at his words. Fine. She shouted in embarrassment into her fingers and turned her head. Sasuke resisted the urge to smirk. After the administration of the antihistamine, Sakura didn't wait long before she began removing her own IV. She felt bad for the time that had been wasted today when she was supposed to be making the food pills. Sakura was just relieved that Ashu had been tested before she gave Sasuke a drug that could potentially kill him. "What are you doing?" Sasuke asked as she removed the monitor and turned off the flatlining machine before anyone came in at the sound. "They said it would be best to stay the night." "I'm a douter," she told him. Yes, Sakura would have advised the same thing to her patients, but she was out of danger now and she felt anxious despite her drowsiness. She was troubling Sasuke enough by accompanying him on his mission. She didn't want to get in his way, she was supposed to be making things easier. Sasuke scoffed at her dismissive, mumbled declaration as she stood from the bed. She blinked heavily and managed to stand upright. It would still take a little bit of time for her to completely pass out from the side effects, so Sakura figured the time she had left awake could be spent productively. The medic immediately went over to the cabinets and pulled out disposable gloves and a mask from the drawer. The mask would serve two purposes. 1. Protect her from inhaling the ashua as she worked, and 2. Hide her ridiculous tomato mouth as Sasuke referred to it. Sakura could die from embarrassment. "What are you doing now?" Sasuke grumbled irritably, following her as she moved. She immediately headed over to the mortar on the cabinet and pinched some of the yellow herb, skin protected from the substance thanks to the gloves. "Eat," she stated plainly. They couldn't proceed further if Sasuke was likely to have a similar allergic reaction. Sakura would have to scrap their entire progress by disposing of the food pill batch. She would be back to square one and they would have to start all over by finding a new foundational herb with the correct properties to achieve the correct results. "Forget it," the Uchiha deadpanned before making to the door. Sakura caught hold of his hand, stumbling in the process and taking a hard fall on her knee. She winced visibly. That would bruise later. Sasuke immediately turned and helped her up and Sakura thanked her mask for hiding her blushing cheeks as well. With the same hand Sasuke had offered, Sakura turned his palm up and placed the ashua in his cupped fingers. "No time." Sasuke glared at her for what seemed like several minutes before reluctantly dumping it down his throat. They both knew he had to for his own sake. Sakura nodded before trashing her gloves and retrieving a new pair. She couldn't risk leaving traces around the hospital and anyone else coming into contact with the pollen if it was responsible for anaphylaxis. Mako had said that it was such a common reaction that they had stopped using it altogether. Sakura halted in her steps, considered her plan, and decided to grab the entire box of disposable gloves. She handed Sasuke the mortar. Sasuke gave her an expression that radiated annoyance but somehow was miraculously completely blank. If she could speak clearly in this moment, Sakura would have asked him how he managed that. "Fauo," she murmured through her mask-covered lips, pairing the word with a beckoning wave. "We'll test your reaction while we wait." She was shuffling out the door before Sasuke had the chance to say anything more. Sasuke trailed his teammate from the room, carrying the mortar of ashua he had ground up earlier that day. This was one of the few times in his life that Sasuke somewhat regretted his decision to refuse the artificial limb that Tsunade had made for him in Naruto. Sakura was walking with one arm against the wall for support and Sasuke's one and only hand was currently occupied. It was well after dark now and many of the staff members were busy attending overnight patients, so they weren't stopped by anyone as Sakura found her way back to the medicine room, which was now cleaned of broken glass and everything back in its space. She reached up and grabbed several bottles of adrenaline and then dug through the drawer for syringes. "Sakura," Sasuke began as she dropped some of the things she was holding onto the floor. "You need rest. We can finish this later. We have to wait for a reaction anyway. Might as well make the pills." "I feel fine," Sasuke reassured her. It was true. Time had passed enough for his fingertips to develop a rash if there was going to be a topical reaction. He had yet to show signs from consumption. Sakura strode past him again, this time walking backwards to face him. He could make out a smile beneath her mask which somewhat irked the Uchiha. She seemed awfully cheery despite nearly dying from anaphylaxis. Sasuke concluded that it had to be the medicine making her drowsy. "Turn around before you fall," he grumbled. She laughed as she began to walk slowly up the stairs. He hurried up behind her and offered her his elbow, which she took thankfully despite his huffing, so annoying. Her laugh was her only response. Sakura was practically nodding off as she watched Sasuke mix and prepare the batch of ingredients for the food pills. She felt relieved at finally seeing headway as Sasuke rolled the batter into 1-inch circular doses according to her instructions and placed them in the hospital's oven. Sakura had tried to do so herself, but Sasuke had insisted she sit down to avoid screwing them up and risking their progress. Sakura allowed him to take the reins, praying desperately that the food pills would turn out and serve their purpose after such a hassle. "Sasuke," she whispered, immediately touching her lips behind the mask as she noticed the decrease in swelling. The ice Sakura had retrieved from the icebox was doing its job. He answered, trashing the latex glove he used to protect his skin and replacing his own. He turned to her then in the dim light, but Sakura couldn't make out his expression because the only light in the room was a lamp over the counter workspace behind him. There was a shadow concealing his features and Sakura was too tired to try to make them out. A lot easier now that her lips were shrinking, Sakura asked, "How are you?" "Any shortness of breath?" "I'm fine," he stated simply. "Good," she replied, thanking that ridiculous Uchiha blood of his for not reacting to the Ashua like hers had. How ironic, Sakura thought, that even Sasuke's genetics seemed to be working for him even in this circumstance. How superior he must feel. Reclined across the small seating bench in the corner, Sakura placed her chin on her chest and inhaled the gentle night breeze that was coming from the opened window. It seemed to be the first night that the sand wasn't trying to shatter the glass. To be honest, Sakura was surprised that the hospital windows even opened. Perhaps they were high enough on the 4th story to avoid the sand barrage. Sasuke came to stand before her and Sakura blinked sleepily up at him in an antihistamine-induced haze. "Sleep," the Uchiha before her ordered. "I'll wake you when they're done." Sakura wanted to argue that she could manage to stay awake for another 20 minutes while the chakra pills roasted, but she wasn't that confident in her ability to do so. At most, she could manage maybe 5 more minutes if she concentrated hard enough. She wanted to ask Sasuke about the conversation he had with Sato. "Sit with me," she said, but it sounded more like a question. There was a minute of silence as Sasuke observed her. The bench wasn't roomy, but Sakura was too drowsy to be apprehensive about their proximity. Sasuke must have not been either, because he sat and exhaled when he did so. Perhaps he was tired too. Sasuke tried not to lean away from her as she settled into his side. He cursed her medicated self for such confidence in a small, darkened space. He counted down the time in his head. He would only have to stay seated here for 17 more minutes. For some reason, that time seemed both entirely too long and entirely too short. "Sato," Sakura began, reaching up to take off the medical mask on her face. Sasuke tried not to smirk at the lips that were still puckered despite having been minimized in size. He blinked past the image to focus on her words. "HN," he responded sourly, thinking of the man whose name had just been dropped between them like a heavy, unwanted stone. Sasuke didn't particularly feel like talking about that man. He had had enough of Sato for one day. How did it go? His teammate probed politely despite being nosy. "Fine," he replied shortly, not wanting Sakura to find out about too many details. How would she react if she knew he had used his Sharingan on him? Probably not well. Sakura would continue to dig for more specifics if Sasuke didn't bring an end to the topic promptly. "His son needs to be sent to Konoha." Sakura nodded, not seeming too surprised at Sasuke's assessment. Perhaps she had been thinking similarly. Thank you for talking to him. It wasn't much of a talk, but Sasuke wasn't going to tell her that, so he just responded again with a finalizing, HN. Sasuke couldn't help but jump when Sakura's fingers touched his left hand. Sasuke, she began, almost in sleepy inquiry as she brushed his palm with her thumb and index. There was hopefulness in her voice and Sasuke cursed her medication again for her damn self-assurance. She began, but Sasuke cut her off before she continued. Sasuke was almost absolutely certain that he knew which words would come next. Shish, he replied, leaning comfortably into her side as his answer to her unspoken confession. Just sleep. After a few breaths, and when Sakura's head nodded onto his shoulder, Sasuke scooped her hand into his, finding the courage to splay her fingers with his own and fasten them into place. Even when he would let her go in 15 minutes, Sasuke would lock the moment into his heart to last him the rest of his life. When he counted down to the last second in his mind, Sasuke counted a few extra seconds. And then a few more. He thought about letting the doses of chakra pills burn to a crisp in the oven, but he decided against it, reluctantly releasing Sakura's hand and pulling away from her heavy head. Making sure that Sakura wouldn't wake, Sasuke silently rose, turned off the oven and retrieved the pills from inside. He placed them on the counter quietly and turned to lean against the counter. He watched Sakura's sleeping form for a few minutes, considering if he should wake her as he promised or let her sleep longer. What was the possibility of sitting beside her and stealing a few moments more? Sasuke knew he was playing a dangerous game. Tomorrow, the Uchiha would test the chakra pill nearby and he and Sakura both were aware of what would happen after that. With the issue of his chakra reserves addressed, he would return to the desert to attempt cross-connecting dimensions again. They both realized Sasuke couldn't waste any more time. And with that thought, Sasuke's stern resolve slipped. He would distance himself later, he thought. He would put the space back between them tomorrow. Tonight, Sasuke wanted to be next to Sakura. He sat back down beside her and softly took up her hand again. Just for a little while longer. Sakura woke in the middle of the night from the pain in her arched neck. She blinked past sleep and realized that she was folded into Sasuke's side with her knees tucked and Sasuke's head leaning against hers. Not only that, but Sakura froze as she realized her hand was entwined with Sasuke's between them. The moment was fragile, and Sakura almost cried of joy and then heartbreak as it shattered when Sasuke responded to her shifting. The weight of his head on hers lifted and Sakura tried not to grab desperately at him to keep him from moving. Instead, Sakura pivoted her eyes to his as his sleep faded and realization appeared on his face. Sasuke released her hand and stood hurriedly, saying nothing despite how Sakura's heart wanted answers. She wanted to know if this moment was genuine or if she had been the one to hold onto him in her sleep. Sakura wanted to believe desperately that Sasuke had allowed himself to be transparent for just a moment and had secretly revealed his true feelings for her by holding her as she slept. Has that been the case? Was she being too optimistic? This wouldn't be the first time their hands had touched. Had he been supporting her as a friend, or did he feel something more? She had to know. Sasuke, she began, but he cut her off for the second time that night. Good. You're awake. Let's go, he declared, hastily placing the finished chakra pills in an open travel container on the counter. Sakura stood then, heart racing and adrenaline pumping as she worked up the courage to come up behind him as he worked. She wasn't going to confess this time. She was going to ask Sasuke if he had been confessing to her while she slept. Do you love me? Sakura was almost certain that he stopped breathing altogether as he paused his task. The Uchiha took a minute to compose himself before exhaling. When are you going to stop that? The statement was meant to be cold, but the fact that it came out so desperately low gave Sakura a rare feeling of hope despite the words. When are you She responded calmly in a whisper. What? He asked incredulously, finally turning to her. She gradually took the last few steps between them and stood carefully in front of him. When are you going to stop pretending that you have no feelings for me? Sakura expected a scoff, a ridicule, but what she got in return was painful fear in Sasuke's usually expressionless eyes. It was true, she realized. Sasuke did have feelings for her. There had been so many signs, but Sakura had been unsure about all of them until this very moment. But what had just passed between them was confirmation. Sakura almost lost her breath at the realization. You're mistaken, finally came the blunt retort, but it was too late. Sakura was already closing the inches between them. Her fingers were already brushing his cheeks as she brought his face to hers. She hesitated. Just for a second. Just long enough for him to pull away from her. But Sasuke barely took a breath before Sakura touched her lips to his. Sakura was already closing the inches between them. Her fingers were already brushing his cheeks as she brought his face to hers. She hesitated. Just for a second. Just long enough for him to pull away from her. But Sasuke barely took a breath before Sakura touched her lips. Sakura placed her lips on Sasuke's carefully. Although she held his face, she did not pull him to her in desperation, but simply guided his mouth to hers gently. Their lips touched for a very long second, brushing each other as Sakura leaned into it. Sasuke wavered for just a moment and then Sakura felt his body bend toward hers. His fingers brushed her left hip hesitantly and Sakura responded by deepening the kiss. The very moment their kissing became more substantial, Sasuke's hand rose from her hip and took hold of her left hand. He pulled it from his cheek. Sakura's soaring heart suddenly dropped to her stomach. Stop, he whispered, and turned his head away from her. He held onto her wrist for just a little longer before dropping it. He took a step back and Sakura wanted nothing more than to grab hold of him and pull him back to that moment, but Sakura knew that if she spoke, the tears would come and her voice would break. What are you doing? He asked her coldly and the question felt like a knife in her gut. Sasuke, she began, stumbling for what to say. Had she misunderstood? No. Sakura had been sure of what she saw in his face just moments before she kissed him. She had been sure that Sasuke had entwined their hands together. There was no mistaking it, but maybe she had moved too fast, which startled him. Sakura cursed her eagerness. She had wanted to kiss him ever since they were genin together, had been imagining this very moment for so long. Do you think I brought you with me for this? Sasuke finally asked, eyes downcast and blank. Despite the cracking in her chest at his harsh words, Sakura tried to think clearly about what she could say to fix this. Her thoughts returned to when Sakura had fought Sasuke back in Konoha as an attempt to get through to his stubbornness. When she had been suspended in the air by Sasuke's Susanoo arm and he had demanded why she expected him to play at love with her, Sakura's answer then was her answer now. No, she responded in the gloom. I don't expect anything from you. I told you that. Sasuke made brief eye contact with her through his shaggy hair. The fear that Sakura had seen just seconds earlier was now shaded by anger and confusion. Sakura, he began, rubbing his forehead with his hand. We can't do this. Sakura wanted to shake him for saying that. She didn't understand his logic. What was going on in that head of his? She had told him before that they didn't have to be together. That she didn't expect him to stay in Konoha. That she had absolutely zero expectations if they could just love one another. So what was it for him? What had him so hung up and determined to keep his distance? Frustrated, Sakura could only think of one reason. It always came back to one thought for Sakura. Why can't we? She finally demanded. Am I wrong? Do you really not feel love towards me? It doesn't matter. He dismissed her heatedly. He was glaring at her now, no longer avoiding her eyes. That statement was only more confirmation for Sakura. Sasuke would be lying to her face if he said he didn't love her. It was true that he had feelings for her and they both knew it. Then what? Before Sakura could ask any more questions, Sasuke's sharp voice pierced the space between them. I'm getting tired of repeating myself. I told you I can never be that person for you. Sasuke had said that to her before. When he had chosen to walk away again after her confession since he had returned to Konoha. The way he said it now was a little different, Sakura realized. His exact words to her before had been, that person is never going to be me. This time he said, I can never be that person. Maybe she was reading too much into it, but there was a subtle implication there, like it wasn't Sasuke's choice. Like there was something else preventing him from being so. Sakura concentrated on her breathing to calm her thoughts, which were speeding up while she watched Sasuke turn away from her toward the counter. He was beginning to gather the food pills from the container and placing them in his travel pouch. Where are you going? She asked, comprehending what was happening. I need space to think, he spoke distantly. Sakura began to take a step towards him. She wanted to demand that he stay put. To tell him that they could work through this together, think together and be on the same page. But it was too late to change that stubborn Uchiha mind. A crackle in the air split open the space between them and Sasuke stepped through it without even so much as looking at her. Before Sakura could even think of racing in the portal after him, it sealed itself, leaving no option for her to follow him. The sensation was deeper than rejection. It felt like she had been slapped in the face. Sakura immediately sat on the ground in shock. Sasuke had left again. Again. When Sakura grasped this, she suddenly felt so tired that she slumped completely to the floor and stared up at the ceiling. There were no tears this time. She was not angry. She was not sad. She felt confused and everything else was empty. When Sasuke landed firmly on his knees in the airless dimension, he immediately slammed his fist in the sand out of frustration. He cursed into the air as if it was personally at fault. It was at fault, he decided as he gave the ground another swipe. These dimensions, his mission, Kagaya, himself and his past, it was all at fault. God, what had just happened? He threw himself back against the sand and stared up into the green sky, which was suddenly so similar a shade to Sakura's irises. He moaned and turned himself over onto his side. He replayed what had gone wrong in his mind. Sasuke had been caught. Sakura had caught him loving her, and when she confronted him with his own feelings, Sasuke couldn't convince her otherwise any longer. If only he hadn't given in to his impulses. He had been chastising himself for so long now about it. What had he been thinking and why did he suddenly give in? And that kiss. When the secret had been revealed, Sakura had crossed that line. Sasuke was so desperate to keep undisturbed. And he had kissed her back. When her lips touched his, Sasuke hadn't pulled away. In fact, his instincts took control as he began to reach for her. He had wanted to pull her closer, cup the back of her neck, part her lips with his own and never stop. And it was that intense desire for her that surprised Sasuke and had him pulling away. Damn. 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 All he knew in that moment was that he desperately needed space from her. He needed time to clear his head and come back to his senses, because if he didn't, Sasuke knew that line would be crossed indefinitely. If he had stayed any longer, Sakura would have successfully been able to persuade him. And if Sakura was able to persuade him to pursue a future with her, then what? Sasuke listed the reasons again to himself, to remind himself just what. First, if he and Sakura kept hurtling towards this direction, then Sasuke could no longer consider her just a friend, which would have various consequences. For instance, Sasuke knew that if he gave Sakura that kind of hope, she would never stop waiting for him. Despite her claims of never looking for someone else, if Sasuke did give in, she really would never look for another guy to make her happy, and while that was a satisfying thought for Sasuke, he admitted that it was also very selfish. And he could not in good conscience leave her waiting for him for the rest of her life. Which leads him to his next reason. Sasuke was duty-bound and secure in his promise to the Leaf, like Itachi, to take on the hard tasks and ultimately protect the leaf. This life was a symbol of selflessness and his ultimate punishment for his sins. This path was how he would atone for everything he did in the past. Thirdly, being associated with Sasuke had already been detrimental to Sakura. Her run-in with Kido was a prime example. He had told himself this 1,000 times. Sakura already had a target on her back because she was his friend. Imagine the penalty for being his wife. Finally, the scariest one of all. If Sasuke decided to allow himself the happiness of a relationship with his teammate, what would happen to him if that happiness was taken away? If his relationship with her was the reason she was ultimately taken from him, Sasuke was afraid of who he would become again. Sasuke kept getting hung up on these reasons. He sat up in the red dirt of the sand and thought about the past few weeks with Sakura, their conversations, and advice from Naruto. With this in mind, he reassessed his reasons. For the first reason, Sakura had already reassured him that his absence would not guarantee her future happiness with someone else. Sasuke allowed himself to believe that one. Sakura had made sure he would by giving him a throbbing black eye to remind him. But was it right for him to make that final choice? The second reason, concerning his journey of atonement, Sakura had said multiple times, "All I would need to know is that you love me back. We don't have to be together to love each other." To which Sasuke's train of thought always brought him back to this: what a miserable life. Which is why he had vowed not to tell her his feelings. Doing so would give her hope, but now she had figured it out without it coming directly from his mouth. So perhaps this reason was invalid now. He had screwed up and revealed it all, and now she knew. Would he be creating a miserable life for her by continuing to reject her after letting his true feelings become apparent? Sasuke shook his head, moving on to his third and fourth reasons. Naruto had assured Sasuke that he would protect Sakura, but if anything ever did happen, then Naruto would get through to Sasuke like he had in the past. Sasuke believed in Naruto more than anything, but just as equally didn't believe in himself. Sasuke slumped forward against his knees, a headache forming quickly with his pent-up energy. All of his reasons seemed to be becoming invalid, which is why the Uchiha was slipping dangerously. If all of those sound objectives were becoming gray, Sasuke still believed it all boiled down to this: did he deserve any of it? He knew that Sakura did. He decided to just stop thinking for a minute. He was confused and didn't know about anything anymore. Frustration soon coursed through Sasuke's body in the form of chakra. The way it always had in the past when he was angry and felt like taking his anger out on the world. Soon his body was crackling with electric chakra as it sizzled down his arm and exploded from his palm into the sand. When Sakura woke the next morning, she forgot where she was for a second. She was curled on the small sofa in the medicine preparation room where she was with Sasuke in the middle of the night, before he left. She groaned as her memories came back to her and jumped when she heard a familiar voice say, "So this is where you've been all night, miss." Sakura rolled over quickly and found herself looking up at a grinning Mako. He must have woken her up, and in embarrassment, Sakura immediately sat up and patted down her staticky hair, a result of tossing and turning against the microfiber fabric in her sleep. "Mako," she acknowledged as he sat beside her on the snug couch as if they were lifelong friends. And like a lifelong friend, Mako was pressing a cup of warm tea into her palms, a habit of his that Sakura was recognizing. "Did you pass out here because of your medicine?" he inquired learnedly, a doctor assessing a patient. Sakura had been heavily dosed with antihistamines before she and Sasuke had come up here. "Sort of," Sakura mumbled dejectedly into her tea as she took a sip. "Sasuke, then?" he asked knowingly, and Sakura spat the tea. Mako laughed and explained, "The pills are gone. I'm assuming he ditched you." Sakura cringed at his bluntness because it was technically and brutally true. "I kissed him." "What?" Mako dropped his mouth and spun toward Sakura with the expression of surprise. His reaction reminded her of a combination of Ino and Naruto, someone who was both dramatic but expected all the details. Maybe it was because of Mako's kindness, familiarity, and constant presence, that Sakura felt like she could confide in him. Yeah, I was reckless and acted too quickly. And then he just left. Sakura placed her palm on her forehead. I can't believe myself right now. Huh, Mako stated, turning back around and pinching his chin in contemplation. I didn't get the impression that he would leave like that. Sakura laughed. Are you kidding? It's a special talent of his. Mako patted his company worker's shoulder in comfort. Don't worry. He'll be back. Sakura looked over at him after he said that, and then she took another thoughtful sip of tea before asking, What makes you say that? Well, it's obvious that he likes you. To be honest, I thought you were already a couple. Sakura coughed on her tea again, which made Mako chuckle in amusement. Give me that before you choke, he said, taking her tea into his own hands. What gave you that idea? Sakura questioned between coughs and punctuated each part of the broken sentence with a pat on her chest. Actually, I guess it was his conversation with Sato yesterday that made me think that. Really? What happened? Sakura sat up, both nervous and excited about the content of what Mako would say next. Well, Mako began, considering the ceiling tiles as he recalled the scene. The first thing that stood out to me was when he told Sato something along the lines of, I care more about her and her goal than the few minutes I could be doing something more beneficial than talking to you. Sakura's mouth fell open in disbelief. He said that. The Sasuke that Sakura knew would never say something like that. Well, maybe the second, rude half of that statement, but not the first part. Yeah, Mako responded with a smile, continuing with, then the genjutsu was awfully showy, followed by the threatening. Sakura jumped out of her seat. He did what? She raised her hands to frame her wide-eyed expression. Just last night, Sasuke had told her the talk with Sato had gone fine. He called that fine. She dragged her palms down her face in anxiety. She knew she had been right to eavesdrop on them. What did she honestly expect to happen? Mako explained that it turned out to their benefit despite the possible violations to several codes of conduct. Sakura couldn't agree that the genjutsu approach was beneficial, but Mako explained that they both had tried to talk to Sato, but he was the type of person to only respect a show of force. Sakura let out an unsure sigh. She felt like she would have to bring it up with Sasuke later. No wonder he tried to change the subject last night. Oh, Mako exclaimed, jumping back to their previous topic of conversation. And his reaction to you going into anaphylactic shock was extreme, even for a friend. Sakura started to disagree with Mako, relaying that Sasuke's reaction was far less dramatic than Naruto's would have been. She stopped herself though, wanting to believe in the fantasy of Mako's perception of their relationship. It was somewhat a relief for Sakura, to see Mako's opinions as missing puzzle pieces to the question of whether or not Sasuke loved her. Thanks, Mako, Sakura smiled sadly, leaning against the wall to the right of the couch, but we aren't a couple. Mako stood up then, and started shepherding Sakura towards the door, stating, you know what they say. Work is the best remedy for worry. Let's go do what you're good at. Sakura laughed and let Mako escort her downstairs, grateful for a friend. Isao was awake in his room, staring out the window when Sakura opened the door, revealing the delicious lunch she had brought for him. When Isao saw that it was Sakura coming into the room, he gave her a surprised smile. Hisa, the female medic whom Sakura had taken a liking to, had informed her of Sato's current episodes of anger at the hospital. Apparently, Gaara, wherever he was, had issued a warrant for Sato's arrest since he had taken to destroying the hospital machinery in his room. Ninja had come for him this morning, escorting him out publicly. Isao had seen his father's apprehension from one of the top story windows. Hisa explained that Isao had not cried or seemed distraught, but instead just watched silently as his father was escorted down the road. Sakura had decided she had better check up on him anyway. Placing the food on his bed, Sakura crouched on the floor like she had done only a few days ago when the child was having an episode of night terrors. The good news was that Sakura's prescription seemed to be doing its job by helping the child pass on to REM sleep more quickly, bypassing the night terrors. According to the staff, Isao had yet to have another episode. Sakura was still mindful of the child's trauma despite this, so she took the humble position of sitting. Isao, she whispered as the child ate ravenously. Do you want to spend some time in the Leaf Village? Isao's head jerked, and he swallowed his food before answering, What? Your father won't be in prison forever. Gaara will make sure he is punished for what has happened to you, but he will get out eventually. Sakura hated to be so blunt with an 11-year-old, but she had to make sure that Isao knew the ins and outs of the entire situation. She was certain that Gaara would allow Isao to spend some time in Konoha, but she wanted to make sure it was what Isao wanted. Isao took another bite of his rice and nodded in thought as she continued, If you spent some time in the Hidden Leaf, you could train as a genin there without fear of your father. We all know he hates Konoha. You would be safe there and could continue treatment at our facilities. Suddenly Isao spoke with a hopeful voice, Will you be there? Sakura gazed at the boy as he shyly dropped his head and looked away from her. Sakura considered his question before replying honestly, yes, but not immediately. When he met her eyes again, Sakura explained further. I am traveling with my partner right now. I don't know when I'll return to Konoha. It was true that Sakura would not immediately return, whether it was a few days or a few months. The way things were with Sasuke right now, she wouldn't be surprised if he didn't return for a while, leaving her to find her way back to Konoha on her own. She was determined to find him herself, crossing dimensions and whatever else, if this was the case. Then yes, Isao announced, startling her out of her thoughts of Sasuke. I want to be wherever you are, ma'am. Sakura's heart melted instantly for the little boy who was looking at her as a long-lost family member. Maybe Sakura had been the first person to care about him since the loss of his mother. He had clung to her so desperately the first night she had spent comforting him through his terror. This was a sad realization that almost made Sakura cry. Then it's settled, she smiled sadly. I'll begin confirming everything with the Kazekage and Hokage. Later that evening, after seeing all her patients, Sakura sat down at a desk upstairs at the hospital and began to write letters. Her first letter was to the Kazekage, requesting official permission for Isao's relocation to the Hidden Leaf Village for continued treatment. She informed him that she wasn't aware of how much time he would be spending, but that she predicted for as long Sato remained a threat to the boy's person and health. She relayed her wishes for the village's fostering of the child to strengthen the bond between villages. Next, she wrote to the Hokage and her sensei, Kakashi Hatake. Despite her close bond with her mentor, Sakura remained formal in her letter. She requested permission for the child's temporary stay and care, along with his continued education. She informed Kakashi of the entire situation, including Sato's resentment towards the leaf, although she had yet to figure out exactly why. Sakura explained the basics of Isao's situation but included another letter for Lady Tsunade that covered the details of his illness, along with his treatment history and medical notes. Sakura requested that once permission was granted, that Kakashi pass this note immediately to Tsunade after an envoy had been sent to retrieve the child from Sunagakure. Sakura informed Kakashi that her hope was to remain with Sasuke for a little while longer. As she sealed both letters, Sakura imagined Naruto's disappointed face when he comprehended that she included nothing for him. He would say, "That old granny gets a letter, but I, a fellow member of Team 7, does not." Then he would push in over Kakashi's desk, cramming his face next to his and insisting to see what all Sakura had written, just to be sure. She laughed aloud to herself at that particular scenario. She suddenly missed that idiot so much that her eyes pricked with tears and she quickly wiped them away, afraid that once her tears started, they wouldn't stop. There seemed to be a lot to cry about recently. Unexpectedly, tea was being placed down before her. She jumped at Mako's sudden appearance, catching her once again in a state of vulnerability. Sorry, he smiled, leaning his hip against the desk. You seemed a little down. Sakura returned his kindness with a smile, taking up the tea and taking a drink of the warm sweet liquid. Just a little homesick, she explained. She didn't want him assuming it was about Sasuke, although the Uchiha had in reality been occupying her thoughts for most of the day. How different and similar lovesickness and homesickness were. To Sakura, Sasuke would always be her home away from home. When he was gone, lovesickness consumed her. Yet, away from Konoha, Sakura felt a similar grief. Is that why you are writing? Mako questioned, pointing towards the letters on her desk. Oh, this is for the Kazekage and Hokage about Isao's transfer, Sakura clarified. Writing home does remind me of my friends, which is why I might have seemed down. Sakura took another drink of the tea. I see, Mako answered emotionlessly, peering up at the ceiling. As she watched him, Sakura suddenly wondered how he knew she had been up here. She hadn't seen him for most of the day, the two deciding to split the work. Not knowing what else to say, Sakura took another full drink from the steaming porcelain cup in front of her. And another. After the fourth gulp, Sakura began to taste something beneath the sweetness. Anyone else might not have been able to sense it, but Sakura's palate was trained to detect oddities. She coughed a little, clearing her throat of the bitter aftertaste. Mako turned to fully face her suddenly and Sakura frowned as she realized that his outline was a little fuzzy and she couldn't blink hard enough to read his facial expression. When Mako reached out before her and took hold of the two letters, Sakura's body wasn't responding to stop him. When he stuffed the letters into his white coat, all Sakura could do was drop the cup in shock, watching it as it rolled across the table. It's nothing personal, came Mako's detached, unfamiliar tone of voice as Sakura's consciousness began to slip. I just can't let you go on any further. She managed to spit out as she forced her body from her chair, knees hitting hard on the ground. She didn't understand what was happening, why Mako would be doing something like this to her. She cursed herself for blindly accepting his tea as often as she did. Even her thinking began to fade as she tried to army crawl toward the door. Her voice was suddenly gone, the possibility of screaming for help suddenly damned. The last thing she remembered was hearing Mako's footfalls get closer, the door being shut in front of her closing eyes. Sasuke blasted through a few too many red dirt mountains in Kagaya's core dimension. With every blast, he felt more like himself. Something chemical happened in his brain when he tunneled raw chakra through his veins, it helped him adopt the right mindset. Sasuke found that the quickest way to erase his thoughts was to surrender them to his shinobi persona who had to be focused. That chakra felt like a jolt to his nervous system, reminding him of himself and his shinobi goal. Of course, now that he was less distracted, he found himself too depleted of chakra to do anything more than take a breather. Now that he was in the core dimension, Sasuke would have to adjust his plans. Previously, the Uchiha had been trying to cross into the desert dimension without going through the middle dimension. Now that he had jumped ship and escaped here by instinct, he was going to have to do this whole thing in reverse. Logically, his next step would have to be crossing into the desert dimension and then overpassing this core dimension directly to Kunagakure. All this would require a lot of chakra. Just to speed up the process, Sasuke momentarily considered swallowing one of the chakra pills that he had swiped before his cold exit hours before into this dimension. It might be a good idea for experimentation purposes, but Sasuke knew enough about shortcuts to comprehend that chakra pills would do more harm than good, which is why they were typically reserved. It was best, the Uchiha decided strategically, to take the pill when he was at his chakra max, so he could ultimately top it off and have just the right amount to make the jump. And besides, Sasuke just didn't have enough time or chakra to experiment recklessly. He would get one shot to try it before he had to wait a significant amount of time for his chakra to replenish enough to try it again if he failed. Not to mention in what ways he would have to recover from whatever side effects he would suffer through from abusing the chakra pills. Sasuke pinched his nose in concentration and tried his best to expel Sakura from his mind while he waited. And it worked just enough, for the most part, consciously, until he fell asleep that night and dreamt of her, his suppressed thoughts confronting him in his subconscious. He had developed a habit of dreaming about Sakura lately, so this wasn't something new to him. His dreams of her usually involved her imminent death, an enemy threatening her life in a way that Sasuke was too late to prevent. This was the case, usually. But something about that kiss earlier had unnerved Sasuke, transforming his instinctual focus on her from one of concern to one of, how would he describe it? Desire, hope, longing. None of those words seemed acceptable to the Uchiha. He hated to have to admit to any of those feelings even when dreaming. In this dream, he was back in that damn medicine preparation room, glaring into Sakura's green eyes after that unexpected kiss. But this time, instead of sensibly leaving, the Uchiha gave in to her desperate pleadings, taking her chin between his fingertips and bringing her mouth back to him. In this dream, Sasuke kissed her. Was kissing her frenziedly, hands suddenly twisting in the pink fuzz at the nape of her hot, flushed neck. Until a hand clamped firmly on his shoulder, jerking him abruptly back away from her. When he turned, Sasuke was face to face with himself. His conscious self versus the subconscious. When Sasuke woke, he laughed derisively as he realized he would always be the one to get in his own way in both reality and fiction. Good, he said aloud to the airless dimension, suddenly frustrated for fantasizing about the opposite scenario of the one he had chosen. He hoped Kagaya, or others like her, somehow were able to hear him through this connection of dimensions. They would see just how determined he was to rid the world of them, how dedicated he was to protect those he loved. So much so, that he would sacrifice and surrender every aspect of his life to this goal. Sasuke stood then, forming the hand sign to split the dimension in the space before him until raging sand materialized before his eyes. He decided he would just not sleep, not unless he was so tired that he wouldn't even have enough left in him to dream. Sakura was a quick learner. The medical ninja gave herself that credit at least as she imitated the slow intake and exhale of breath that professed sleep. This certainly wasn't her first kidnapping. Half a year ago, Kido had done just exactly that, and as soon as his posse realized she was awake, the show had begun. Sakura's poison-trained system had finally started to break down whatever sleep-induced toxin Mako had spiked her drink with. With no conception of how long she had been unconscious, Sakura had become cognizant and immediately began to mimic an undisturbed state. This time, she was set on listening. This time, she would assess and strategically plan. She had been waiting to hear the answer as to why she found herself in this particular situation as she was dragged, then hoisted over someone's shoulder. For a blurry second, Sakura was taken back to her drunken episode several weeks ago when Sasuke carried her home after the medic had decided to deplete Tsunade's alcohol stash. The only similarity between this state of stupor and that one was the pounding headache that made Sakura want to vomit. That was when memory caught up with her and she began to act. She was exchanged from one shoulder to the next, and Sakura realized suddenly that she had been carried by Mako up until this point, that bastard, and was being surrendered to someone else. She didn't know the voice. Great job, a guttural accent commended Mako for his successful abduction. Sakura planned on commending him herself once she regained the upper hand. Just shut up and walk, came Mako's voice, in a tone that sent shivers down Sakura's spine. She had never heard him speak like that. How could she have been played by him this whole time? Sakura began to second-guess her decision to pretend the longer that they walked. In cases of abduction, it was well known that a person's chances of survival drastically dropped if the kidnapper succeeded in moving them to a second location. But Sakura thought of Isao, her patients, her coworkers, and even Sasuke and resolved herself. It was better for them if she could allow these maniacs to believe that they had got her. What they didn't know was that their mistake would be getting Sakura just far enough away from civilians where she could cause some real damage. She had handled Kido, she could take care of these two as well. Neither of them could have anticipated her other skill set. Mako didn't know her well enough. When they had dropped her not so gracefully onto her back an hour later, Sakura bit the inside of her cheek to keep from making a pained groan or facial expression to give away her performance. Other voices chimed in then, and Sakura realized her adversaries had just doubled. About damn time, someone drawled as she was dropped. You couldn't have taken care of this sooner. There was some shuffling as her capturers arranged themselves in what sounded like a cramped space. Mako announced. She's surprisingly resistant. Not to mention Uchiha's been around just until recently. That particular statement wounded Sakura a little more than the fall she just sustained. Of course, this was all about Sasuke. She should have known. Kido had kidnapped her for this same reason, to lure in Sasuke, kill her in front of him so his eyes would change. Sakura was starting to get pretty annoyed with people trying to use her to get to Sasuke, as if she would ever let that happen. When would they learn that things weren't so black and white? Mako's previous statement the morning of her capture began to make more sense to her now. Well, it's obvious that he likes you. To be honest, I thought you were already a couple. And Sakura cursed her mouth for confiding in him because now she identified his interest as a predatory investigation. Or maybe you just weren't trying hard enough because you liked her, came a response from a voice Sakura seemed to recognize for some reason. It was different from the rest, distinctively female. Sakura mentally raised an eyebrow at that fact. Believe me, that's not the case, came Mako's defense. Ashua just didn't do the trick on a medical specialist as we had hoped. And then Sakura was cursing. Cursing a stream of silent words that wouldn't do her any good to express verbally now that she was getting information. The bastard had even convinced her that Sasuke should take it. She thanked the universe for Sasuke's non-allergic reaction to it. What ended up working? Came the female voice again, expressing honest curiosity. Tien kindness, Mako stated unemotionally, eager to move past the topic. Now let's get on with this. Of course, said the female again, tossing what sounded like clanging metal onto the floor at his feet. You have been given a position among us as promised for your service. Welcome. Sakura couldn't resist. She snuck a peek through the corner of her eyelashes at them then and did not like what she saw. She was in a small gathering room with a dome ceiling, one of the many adobe homes on the outskirts of the sand village. She had also miscounted by one. There were 4 of them, an extra silent companion seated and leaning against the wall farthest from her, seemingly uninterested. In the same second, Sakura also noted that Mako had bent down to retrieve something she recognized, a headband with a foreign symbol etched onto it, the same symbol she had seen on the headbands of their assailants back at the Tanagakure Lodge. She made the connection. These were the same ninja who had followed Sakura and ambushed her and Sasuke in the night. The ninja she had recounted to Gaara, who was supposedly on their trail. How did they manage to get past him? Just as Sakura thought this, an unexpected thud came from the ceiling accompanied by the crumbling sound of sand. Quiet consumed them as no one moved. Sakura observed quietly as all ninja revealed their weapons in silence as if they were snakes quietly coiling back to strike. The man in the corner nodded toward the door, and the ninja closest to Sakura's head disbanded from the group and disappeared within a second. Once outside, the same ninja began swearing loudly at some surprise. Everyone in the room relaxed as a child's vocal squirming reached their ears. The shuffling continued as this child was being brought inside. Damn kid must have followed us. The returning ninja said in annoyance. Got some bite to him. If Sakura hadn't been laying down already, she would have collapsed in shock and fear at the memorable voice of the child they had just apprehended and thrown down next to her. Get away from me, Isao shouted, the boy swinging a kunai out in front of him. They laughed wickedly at the boy's ferocity. Okay, show's over. Protective instincts kicked in swiftly as Sakura successfully reached forward and stole the kunai away from the child in less than a blinking second. There were unanimous intakes of breath throughout the room as Sakura managed to get Isao behind her and compress the blade threateningly against the esophagus of the man who had touched the both of them. It all happened within a microsecond. Sakura's sudden revival activated the group's defense and they were upon her, but she let out a snarl, drawing blood against the man's throat. They immediately stopped their advance when the man she had ensnared began to laugh, throat nicking against the knife as he did so. Do it already, he breathed through his laugh. My death will be a part of this effort. It will only help us in our cause. Sakura was certainly tempted by that. The way he had roughly handled Isao seconds before with his colossal insensitive hands was like a fresh and bloody burn on her skin, painful and needing the immediate relief of this man's execution. But something in his words froze her hand. A cause? Glad you are finally awake, came Mako's distinct tone, a vicious friendliness warming the words again. Shut up, you liar, Sakura spat viciously. If you let him go, we'll tell you why we are going to kill you, came the female's voice, and Sakura flashed her angry green eyes over in the woman's direction. Her face and hair were covered, and Sakura acknowledged the same black shamog that had concealed her attackers in Tanagakure. Fat chance, she thought. Sakura immediately assessed her chakra levels and was aggravated by how slow chakra was reacting to her body's summoning of it. Mako was a fellow medic, and Sakura deduced that whatever he had given her had strategically messed with her system and chakra connection. Sakura mutely criticized herself for trusting Mako. How many times would she be tricked in her lifetime? Probably many more, but she would learn from them all. Oh well, she thought. She had had worse odds before. Her only additional complication was Isao because now she was responsible for herself and the 11-year-old boy who had pursued after her. Had he somehow witnessed Mako's abduction of her? It was at this moment that the woman at the front of the room began to take off her mask, and Sakura almost dropped the knife altogether. As the black wrap was loosened and it slumped around the woman's neck, Sakura immediately recognized the face of Hisa, the female medic ninja who had been her assistant throughout Sakura's entire stay in Kunagakure. Even Isao behind her gasped when he saw the woman who had helped take care of him. Sakura's moment of surprise was all it took for the ninja she stood behind to reach his hand lightning quick between his own throat and the kunai. He grabbed onto Sakura's wielded wrist with his left hand and flung her forward over his shoulder. She mentally cursed as she went flying toward the forefront of the room, landing painfully into the opposite wall. She practically went through it, and the side of the adobe house collapsed around her. As she fell, Sakura realized that the brute force used against her revealed their intention to truly kill her. They weren't planning on preserving her, let alone sparing her life. Sakura had been launched farther than she initially realized because when she managed to rise from the dust and sand, she winced at the other consequences of her distraction that was now beyond reach. One by one, the villains stepped through the new door that Sakura had made, carrying Isao with them. In the next second, Isao was tossed to the sand, screaming threats and clutching at the thug man's foot that suddenly pinned down his chest. When the beast applied pressure to the child's sternum, Isao began to moan in pain. The sight enraged her, and she broke her silence. You're wrong if you think this plan of yours will work. She screamed at them. I am nothing to Sasuke. Nothing to anyone, do you hear me? All but the quiet man snickered in response to her declarations, but she continued, seething through her teeth. He will not come to save me. You will not get what you want by using me. Let the child go. This isn't about Sasuke, replied the wraith-like man who came last through the shattered side of the building's exterior wall. For the first time since her awakening, the still man walked to the head of the party and addressed her. Neither is it about the Hokage, or even the Jinchuriki. This is about you. The night suddenly seemed starless, dark, and void of all sound save the squealing wind. As the stranger spoke this truth, 3 of the other members flanked his sides before fanning out beside him like Tamari's fan, creating a close-knit semicircle. The phantom-like man stood casually in the middle, his face cloaked in the combined darkness of night and the face wrapping he wore. As Sakura looked closer, even this man's eyes, the only thing that could be seen between the black fabric, seemed like depthless holes of nothing. This man reminded Sakura of a walking desert mirage, some sort of shadow demon hiding in human clothing. Sakura gritted her teeth as her body instinctively begged her to flee. Isao's need for her overpowered that. She would die before abandoning him. Me? Sakura asked instead, revealing her honest surprise. What do you want with me? It was a trick, the Kunoichi told herself. What could they possibly have to gain from killing her when much more powerful figures literally walked side by side with Sakura? There was nothing to gain besides Sasuke's, Naruto's, or Kakashi's ultimate death, defeat, or capture. Your efforts to fix the mentally ill goes against the philosophy of our newly founded group, came Hisa's poison-dripped answer. Sakura noted that they all took a step toward her in synchrony, tightening in on her a little closer. This practiced pack was testing her and Sakura took a step back to match their own. She was smart enough not to let them surround her like the meal they believed her to be. Sakura felt suddenly empathetic for those mother animals who felt torn between their captured young and their own safety. Let them believe that she was this helpless observer who reeked with fear. And what philosophy is that? She asked, imitating the breaks of a trembling in her throat. She practically seeped the question with distress. It must have had the effect Sakura wanted, for her enemies smiled in response and took another step toward her. With an insanity that Sakura had not heard in his statements before, Mako declared emphatically, progression. Sakura couldn't wait to punch his teeth so far down his throat that Mako's vocal cords and epiglottis would permanently suffer damage. Sakura stammered again, portraying the weakness they wished to see. Progression. Another step back. Just a little more. Whether or not it is your intention, you will create a shinobi generation of weaklings, stated the leader again. He essentially breathed more darkness, because the night around her suddenly grew thicker. Was she imagining it, or could this be some sort of jutsu? How do you figure that? She questioned, adding a nervous laugh to her annoyed-tinged inquiry. Sakura's exasperation with their reasoning was starting to make her focus waver. As she asked, Sakura concentrated on her chakra. She was calling it, but it did not spring forth. She would have compared the sensation to drawing blood from a syringe, except her chakra was like liquefied cement and the syringe was the size of a pen. If she chose to use it, the strength of 100 seals just might flood her chakra paths and burst through whatever plug the medicine had caused, or it could potentially well up like water in a dam and she wouldn't have any access to it. Medically, that might be a concern. And it had only been a few weeks since she had last used her reserves to assist Sasuke crossing dimensions, so would the risk be worth the additional amount behind her forehead? In an eerie declaration, the masked leader stepped toward her again and said, if you go around curing the next generation of their anger and pain, brainwashing them with this vision of peace, there will be no more progression. What the hell does that mean? She asked, all pretense gone now. The confidence in her tone made them stop their encroachment. For a second, Sakura didn't look so weak to them. They glanced at the leader, the shadow man, and then again at Mako because Mako knew her best out of the group, he had also drugged her. The medicine should still be working. We must hurry though. It won't last all night. Listening to this, Sakura inhaled and exhaled, willing the small drip of chakra to pool more heavily in her palm. She would only have one shot before she could collect enough chakra for another one. Sakura took another step back. And another, drawing them away from Isao and his captor. Just a little more. Keep them talking. There is peace in the world now, Sakura baited. There's no need for children to suffer through trauma alone anymore. The leader did not hesitate a second before responding with the practiced mission justification of their group. Without anger, hatred, and pain, there is no incentive for war between villages. And without war, there is no need for young shinobi. You will create a generation of weaklings who cannot defend our borders. The world of shinobi as we know it will disappear. Sick freaks, Sakura thought. She was their target because she worked with children. They were afraid that children would be weaker without pain. The world would be a better place, she commented, if there weren't people like you in it. Sakura didn't care to listen to this nonsense anymore. She hated to kill them, but they weren't giving her much of a choice. At exactly this moment, Isao had somehow reached into his pocket for another kunai, stabbing it into the foot that held him down. Apparently, the ninja had been distracted by the rest of the pack's slow pursuit of Sakura and the conversation. Isao left his mark, slicing it clean across the top. The ninja screamed, which turned the heads of all those before her. Isao bolted up before anyone had the chance to stop him. On his feet now, he charged the group and Sakura watched in panic as the ninja he had left behind now followed, brandishing a sword of his own. Kill that brat, came Hisa's order. And then Sakura was in the air, her fury propelling her forward and then down on top of them. Meiko let out a cry of alarm, the first to notice her above them. The kunoichi had just enough for one hit, and Sakura prayed the sand wouldn't buffer too much of it. She fisted the meager amount of chakra between both of her palms, fingers interlocked to make a combined fist. She brought them down as hard as she could at their feet, making it through several feet of sand before she connected it with the ground. Sakura was not able to see the damage done, because not only did sand fill the air, but all light blinked out and a shroud of complete blackness consumed her. Sasuke hated Kagaya's sand dimension even more than he disliked the desert that covered the vast majority of the Land of Wind. This dimension was forever hot despite that the dimension's otherworldly moon hung low in the dark horizon, a massive orb of blinding white that mirrored the Earth's moon in exact replica. Sasuke had always felt like the illusion was a reminder of the Otsutsuki people, and that Kagaya had designed this dimension to display something that reminded her of home. To Sasuke, the dimension moons eerily reminded him of Kagaya's pupil-less irises, always watching the spaces that existed between nothing. Glaring at it in a paranoid response, Sasuke, deprived of chakra now, walked toward it slowly and determinedly as a challenge. He would show her exactly how her dimensions were now his domains. The Uchiha decided he would walk freely here because he couldn't do as he pleased in his own world. He wanted to scream curses at that eye-like globe, demanding the Otsutsuki show up and take him on now in his weakened state. Come on, he screamed. All of you, what are you waiting for? Let's get this over with. I will find you all eventually. He wanted it done. He wanted this over. He wanted to have a life despite his promise to be the world's sacrifice for peace. As if to taunt him, Sasuke's shuffling feet snagged over something in the sand, and he glanced down at his feet in surprise. A ninja's vest, half burnt away from acid, displayed itself like a green-bearing flag left behind by those who had explored a barren planet. Even though Sasuke had been the only human to ever walk here, Sakura's old vest that Sasuke had used as a teleport connection between dimensions back when he had been trapped here, always served as a call to his more current jumps. In other words, every time Sasuke had come here over the past couple of years, no matter where he opened the portal, he would always land within a few feet of it. In the past, he had thought of removing it because it was a painful reminder in many ways. But as he returned consistently to the same spot, Sasuke began to theorize that it had something to do with his ability to travel here. At first, Sasuke believed it was because during teleportation, his path crisscrossed into a connection that had already been created and used before. This was the most likely explanation. His chakra simply wasn't strong enough to rip a new tear in the fabric of space and time. But as he looked at it now, Sasuke wondered if there was more to it than that. Did emotions tie him to this piece of fabric? And because Sakura's friends always existed somewhere in the back of his mind, did his chakra seek it out as something familiar to secure itself to before flinging him through the vacuum of nothingness? Sasuke glared back at the moon in hatred, wondering too, if it could be just a sick part of Kagaya's illusions, knowing that the vest had in the past and always would continue to stop the Uchiha in his tracks. A temptation reminding him of a different life, one that would cause him to ignore the Otsutsuki. Kagaya would want that. He sat down beside it despite how much he wanted to turn and walk away from it as he always had. This time, he let it be his beacon out of the void, drawing some sort of strength from it in his chakra-deprived state. The whole point of being this exhausted was to avoid thinking of her, but the tattered shinobi vest always pricked him with guilt, especially now when he had left her alone in Sunagakure despite his promises of partnership. It was as if the green material had a voice of its own, saying, "See how far she would go for you." And Sasuke, keeping his thoughts private from the ever-watching rock above, would think to himself, "I am doing this for her, too. She will understand eventually. She will accept just how far I am willing to go for this peace we both envision. We have the same goal." As Sasuke thought these thoughts again, Sasuke accepted that if they couldn't be united in love, then at the very least, they would be united in the same goal, the same vision of happiness. It comforted him ever so slightly. He sighed as he fingered the chakra pills at his waist, guilt invading his chest and suffocating him. How could he tell her his true feelings and make her accept what he was willing to accept? How could he satisfy the both of them and do the least damage? Sasuke exhaled and leaned back in the sand once more to sleep, sweat beading across his brow in the high temperature. He turned on his side and faced the vest in exhaustion, pretending it was her, pretending to be satisfied with this small piece of the woman he loved and would ever allow himself to dream this close to. The blackness pervaded all of Sakura's senses as soon as her feet hit the ground opposite the giant hole she had just created in the sand. She blinked hard, hearing the cursing and alarmed proclamations of those she had attacked. The darkness was like a leaden mist before her eyes and Sakura instinctively created the sign of release for genjutsu. And whether it was from her lack of chakra, or because this was a ninjutsu, Sakura's attempts yielded zero results. The blackness remained and blinded her past several inches in front of her face. When she heard Isau's shout for her, she had no choice but to dart forward blindly, determined to reach him before someone else did. "Let go of me!" the child screamed, his pursuer unfortunately catching up with him. Sakura navigated through the pillars of sand-dripping earth that now projected themselves in the air around her. With hands outstretched, she cursed herself. The blow had meant to disorient her opponents and it had, but this damn thickening darkness made it difficult to move forward through the landscape of her own destruction. Thankfully, the waterfalling crumble of sand masked her rushed footfalls. The kunoichi drew upon her chakra once more, but it came as slowly as before, the medicine still lingering in her system with its toxic chakra clotting effects. Sakura moved hurriedly ahead, hoping that she wasn't the only one choked with darkness. Isau's curses came and Sakura finally rounded a huge boulder to find herself facing the back of the thug's head. He had his massive hands around the child's throat, weapon tossed aside in favor of a crueler death to the victim that had caused him so much trouble. Despite his struggle for his life, Isau made eye contact with her the moment they were close enough to see each other. His attacker saw a recognition register in the boy's eyes and spun to face her. But it was too late. Sakura's kunai was slicing the gray flesh of his throat before he even had time to see her, a final blow that had been delayed from earlier, but determined by fate to be his cause of death. The brutish ninja dropped to the ground instantly, and Sakura justified the blood that pooled freely at her feet by remembering his cruel actions to the child that struggled to catch his breath before her. Sakura picked up the abandoned weapon, the weight unfamiliar in her hands. The sound of the man's death had betrayed her position, and the footsteps of his companions crunched closer to her location. Terrified, Sakura clutched the child, pushing him behind the jagged column of rock behind her. "Isao," she pleaded in a whisper. "You have to make a run for it. I won't leave you," he declared, determined to fight to his death for her. "The only thing you can do for me now is to go get help," she said honestly. It was a half-truth. There were only a few realities before them, and Isao making it back to the village and bringing help was not likely due to how much time it would take. But Sakura was desperate to remove the brave child from the scenario. She cared too much to let him sacrifice himself for her. "Miss," he protested, but Sakura propelled him forward in the blinding darkness, an enemy's footsteps rounding the earth that cloaked him. It was too late to argue, and Sakura turned to face the phantom man who stepped toward her invisibility, shadows curling around him as he cleared a path through the inky mist. Sakura faced him squarely, taking a defensive stance and raising the wicked katana with her sharper green eyes, sending a stare to him along the metal surface. The shadow-wielding ninja smirked and the rest of his crew appeared beside him. "Go!" she screamed in final command at the child whose feet took off into the black at her back. Sakura brandished the sword in confident threat at her attackers, herself serving as the shield between herself and Isao. They wouldn't move an inch in pursuit of his direction if she had anything to do with it. Sakura had never wielded a sword before, but in the absence of chakra, she would become a master at it in this moment. Sakura was a kunoichi, a medic, a chakra control master, the pupil of a legendary Sannin, a rising legend herself, and today, she would add something else to her list. Scratch that. She would do two things tonight. She would eradicate this new movement of anti-peace revolutionaries, and she would do it at disadvantage with the weapon of her enemy. As Isao ran, he clutched his side in pain, a sharp stab in his waist. The man who Sakura had killed moments before must have broken one of his ribs as he crushed Isao to the ground. At first, the young ninja pitched forward in blackness, half debating to turn back to help the pink-haired ninja. But Isao knew the truth. He had been foolish to pursue her and her kidnappers alone, and he cursed himself for his rash decisions in his fear of losing sight of them. He should have told someone else even if he lost their trail. Any of them, anyone at all, would have been a better help to Miss Haruno than he had been. Isao's bravery amounted to nothing, and it was evident in every piercing word from the medic kunoichi. "The only thing you can do for me now is to go get help." Isao let the command fuel him forward despite the pain, until the night faded into morning hours later and the mighty walls of the sand village came into view. He didn't know how much time had passed, and he didn't wait to scream for help. The cage was not in the village, he had overheard that much. Neither was the teammate that traveled with Miss Haruno. He yelled the only name he could think of, the name his heart still cried out to despite how much he hated him. The roaring sand shrouded his cries, and the prison walls would buffer it completely, but Isao begged to the air, shouting over and over, "Father! Help me!" The taste of the chakra pill was bitter, smoky and acrid. The Uchiha almost gagged trying to swallow it down, and he silently confirmed that Sai had been right, although Sasuke hated to agree with anything his entitled replacement said. What had he called them? Mudballs. Despite the accurate term, Sasuke feared his kunoichi companion more than he hated the taste, so he would keep the complaint to himself. The pill pooled in his stomach and Sasuke took a breath, focusing on the ignition starting in his core. The rush of power was exhilarating as it topped off his chakra supply, overflowing visibly in a blue-purple halo around him. It sizzled along his skin and Sasuke grinned wickedly as a spiraling vortex appeared before him, much larger than any he had been able to create on his own before. This was it. It was working. He pushed beyond the core dimension easily, his ready supply of chakra speedily fueling the tunnel between the void, but it ate and ate away at his energy and the color disappeared from his skin. Running off his own meager supply now, Sasuke exhaled and grinded his teeth in concentration. Finally, the connection was made and Sasuke threw himself through it. He landed roughly, skidding to a halt, and he was ironically thankful for once for the land of wind's high volume of sand. Sasuke found himself smirking up at the lightning as he recovered, because this was his first victory in a long struggle of jumping dimensions. To the Uchiha, it was proof that he was doing exactly what he was meant to do, beat Kagaya and the Otsutsuki clan at their own game in their own territory. Giddy in his success, Sasuke used the last of his dwindling energy to rise to his feet, his thoughts immediately turning to the woman who had helped make this all possible. He hadn't achieved this on his own, Sakura deserved the credit. And it was the first time that Sasuke could admit that he needed someone else's help in his goal. The dark walls of Sunagakur cut the bright morning horizon in half and Sasuke's gut twisted in a combination of emptiness and guilt at the thought of returning to Sunagakur to face his friend after their kiss. Sasuke was torn between finding her immediately to tell her that their plan had worked, pretending the kiss never happened in typical Uchiha fashion. But the time he had stolen away from her, to think, brought him to only one conclusion: he needed to apologize, again, and at least explain why. He had made her a promise to be a partner that depended on each other, and here Sakura was continuing to keep that promise, while Sasuke stole moments of happiness and bailed when he had to face the consequences. Suddenly remembering their sunset conversation the last time he had returned after leaving, Sasuke felt a fresh stab to his consciousness as he recalled her statement: a part of partnership is communication. Sasuke slowly made his way toward the village gates. When he passed through the canyon-like entrance, people greeted him with good mornings, while others stared openly at him. Their gazes were a little different, warmer, and Sasuke wondered if his teammates' influence in the hospital had something to do with his new reception in Sunagakur now. Feeling even more ashamed, Sasuke resolved himself for his female companion's wrath and made a straight line for the hospital. When he entered the hospital's double doors, Sasuke came upon a scene that made his stomach drop into his feet. Kankuro, who was haggard from exhaustion, and had apparently returned sometime in the night, was fisting the collar of a hospital staff member. "What do you mean they're not here?" he bristled. "If she's not in her rooms, then she should be here." "Where's Mako? Where's the kid?" "I don't know, sir," came the panicked response from the employee, terrified to be facing the cage's right-hand man. "I'm sure they're in the village somewhere." Hearing those words had Sasuke acting before thinking, and the Uchiha rushed forward to fist the shirt of the same medic. "Are you talking about Sakura?" His eyes darted between the both of them, and Kankuro's grip released from the startled staff's shirt in the same moment he shoved Sasuke's own hand away. "Where the hell have you been?" Kankuro accused icily, and a fire Sasuke didn't even know he had left in him, surged from his throat in anger. "What the hell is happening?" he demanded, taking another step toward the puppet wielder. Kankuro pinched his nose in frustration, then beheld him in shock. "You mean Sakura isn't with you?" Sasuke's eyes widened in immediate response, an answer refusing to form on his lips. Instead, he shouted, "You don't know where she is." Kankuro frowned deeper at his sudden animosity. "She hasn't been seen since yesterday morning," he explained quickly. "The innkeeper said she never came back to the inn. Mako, another medic, and Sakura's young patient are missing too." Sasuke didn't wait for any further explanation before he began sprinting up the stairs to the second floor of the hospital, the filter for his behavior now completely removed. Let everyone think what they want. That bastard. When Sasuke got a hold of Mako, he wasn't sure what his feet were unusually heavy and his breath labored as he continued climbing to the third floor toward the medicine preparation room they had occupied together only recently. "Sakura." He kicked open the door and furiously searched the vacant room with his eyes. After seeing no one, Sasuke stared at the empty couch where they had sat so close to one another the night before last. As if his memory of her there could recall her, Sasuke gazed openly at it, breathing hard. Having followed the Uchiha, Kankuro appeared in the door behind him. We've already checked the hospital. She isn't here. We need to check the rest of the village quickly. She couldn't be missing. Was she really with that assistant of hers or that child? Were they off somewhere else doing something medical, or were they truly missing? Shit. 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 He turned on Kankuro in his unnerved rage. Sasuke wanted to demand where they had been, him and the cage, but Sasuke remembered that Sakura had told him that they were investigating trouble near the border. He cursed himself again for being selfish and leaving her here alone. As if reading his thoughts, Kankuro explained, I was sent back by the cage in the night. He is handling a situation regarding the ninja Sakura said ambushed you both in Tanagakure. The incidents were apparently related. What do you mean? Sasuke suddenly asked, a deep and cutting sensation coming over Sasuke that he hadn't felt in a very, very long time, fear. Kankuro looked down and away from him, debating on how much to reveal. With some unmentionable methods, we were finally able to find out who their target was, he finally informed with a sigh. His eyes rose to meet Sasuke's and the Uchiha saw the same raw fear mirrored in Kankuro's eyes. It's Sakura. At the very moment that Sasuke's knees felt like collapsing beneath his weight, the same staff member that the two ninja had threatened seconds before, came running into the room, panting heavily from having hiked the floors. Come quickly, he urged between breaths, turning immediately to run back down the steps. Isao has returned. Kankuro made eye contact with the Uchiha before they both bolted back down the stairs, taking 2 and 3 steps at a time. Sasuke cursed his lack of chakra that kept him from just teleporting downstairs. Sitting in a chair, the child clutched his side. Sasuke noticed that he kept trying to rise, but the staff held him down as they tried to bandage a wound on his arm. Deep purple finger marks circled around the child's neck like a collar. Not me. Her. Go find her, please. He shouted as he struggled against them. Calm down, boy, a woman medic urged. We have to staunch the flow of blood from your arm. The child looked at his wound as if he didn't even know it had been there. When Isao caught sight of Sasuke and Kankuro, he started to cry. Help. Please help, he shouted, and they quickly moved to hover over the child. Kankuro suddenly kneeled before him, taking the gauze from the medic and wrapped the child's arm himself as he questioned. Speak, kid, Kankuro urged, what is going on? Miss Haruno, he choked between tears. She's still out there. Please, we have to go. Before Kankuro could ask the child why, Sasuke did something appalling, an act that Sakura would be disappointed in him for. His Sharingan flashed bright, soaking up the last of his chakra like a sponge, and he caught the panicked child's stare in his own crimson and purple one. Just as he had to Isao's father, Sasuke stepped into the child's memories. Isao's recollections were almost too overwhelming for Sasuke to handle at the moment, each image dripping with the fear in which young ones saw the ninja world. There was also bravery in them and familial concern for the pink-haired Kunoichi. Sasuke skipped through the memories like speeding up a film, an act that made his head throb in pain. He didn't care about his own state at the moment though, seeking the green-eyed face of the woman he had come to love. There. Isao's most recent memory of Sakura was of her telling him to go get help. Sasuke didn't have time to go back further and he let the memories play out from that point, mapping the child's nighttime desert sprint, hours long, from the empty desert back to the gates of the village. Not needing to explore the child's mind further, he released Isao and they both gasped. Sasuke clutched his eye, ignoring the angry glare on Kankuro's face. He didn't care about Kankuro's morals or even the child's shocked state at that moment. There was only one thing he cared about. He would let the child explain the details to Kankuro. Sasuke didn't have the time to explain things to Kankuro. Instead, the Uchiha did the unthinkable, playing the very dangerous game of popping another chakra pill into his mouth as he sprinted out the hospital doors.